Hello, 5th and 6th grade. This video is Fridays, September 25th, and I'm going to cover a couple of things. If you look at page 25 in your work text, in fact, if you can grab that, you can pause it if you need to. But you have two different days assignments on that one worksheet. And so on the top, on 30 to 30, on school and family, you have from 30 to 33 about the tablet houses, those things being attached to the temple. And it says the students were usually from the, trying to see where that is, boys from wealthy families attended school. And so they were usually boys from wealthy families. All right, and so that particular page 25 at the top, you have it on page 30 to 33, but the 34 and 35 are at the bottom part. So that's part of your assignment then. And then 26 and 27, which are study guides. And so those study guides are going to repeat a lot of the things that you've already talked about. And so, so let's read 34 and 35. If you have your book, go ahead and get it out, and we'll read it together. And so it starts off this way. Where was the center of religion in a Sumerian city-state? That's kind of the focus question that it wants you to look at. And it says, religion, priests, and religious beliefs. Religion played a role in almost every aspect of Mesopotamian life. The Mesopotamians worshipped their gods by praying to them, giving them gifts, and performing rituals. They believed that if the gods were pleased, the people would prosper. If the gods were not pleased, disaster would strike. Religious rituals and prayers accompanied all activities, no matter how ordinary. The Mesopotamian religion was a clear rejection of the one true God. The people practiced polytheism, the worship of many gods. These gods were thought up by a people. The people believed that the gods ate, slept, and married, but unlike people, the gods supposedly lived forever. The Mesopotamians, sorry, I lost my place there for a second. Mesopotamians created these gods in their image instead of recognizing that they themselves have been created in the image of the one true God. In the center of Ur, and remember Ur is where Abraham is from, and so God called him out of these false religions there from Abraham. So there were at that time, I would believe, still people who believed in the one true God, the creator of the world, going from the stories that they had learned from basically from the time from the flood that Noah had passed down about creation and the one true God, and even the Messiah that was to come. And they didn't know that as the name of Messiah, but they knew of the promise that was made to Adam and Eve, and that promise being that with Adam and Eve they would have there would be the seed of the woman. There's only been one person that's ever born that was just the seed of a woman. That was Christ. The serpent would bite the heel of that person or that seed of the woman, but then that seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, or crush Satan's head, in other words, and destroy his control is the idea there. And so, in the center of Ur stood an impressive pyramid-like structure called a ziggurat. I had mentioned this in class a couple of weeks ago, actually. This temple could be seen by people approaching the city while they were still a long distance away. So here you have two notes. Polytheism, ziggurat. You can see that in the center of Ur, there was a ziggurat. The Mesopotamian religion was a clear rejection of the one true God. And then religion played a role in almost every aspect of Mesopotamian life. All those are good notes to take. And so, I have a minimum requirement of 4 per page, but as you guys have noticed on some of the quizzes that we've been taking, the more detailed you are, the better you're going to be at being able to do that. Now, it will help you by doing the workbook. So you do the workbook, and you're going to get not only points for the workbook, but you're also going to get information from that as far as what you are allowed to, for what you need to understand for the quizzes and tests. All right, so let's look at, Mesopotamian beliefs. On the bottom left there, that little blue box, it says Mesopotamians believe that humans were created to serve the gods. The Mesopotamians believed in many gods who were not all powerful. These gods had to work hard, and their work frustrated them. The Mesopotamian gods were not morally perfect, as the God of the Bible is perfect. These gods complained about having to fulfill their duties, but the Bible teaches that work is a blessing, not something to be avoided. The Mesopotamian worldview is a corruption of the biblical worldview. God made people to work. When people work and rule over the earth, they show that they are made in God's image. But after the fall, work can become, hard and frustrating. So the Mesopotamians developed myths in which the gods were frustrated with work and created humans to do the work that they did not want to do. And you have a feeling that some of the humans were feeling that way, as they mentioned there. So a ziggurat, top right of 34, a ziggurat usually had 3 to 7 terraced levels with a shrine or a tiny temple on top. A couch or bed was placed in the shrine for the god to rest on. Gardens were planted on each terrace. The bricks were often covered with tiles or painted to make the levels different colors. In an area beside the ziggurat, there were homes for the priests and the priestesses and others involved in the activities of the temple. There were storehouses, workshops, and additional chambers. Pens holding sacrificial animals were also kept near the temple. The ziggurat in Ur was originally built by a king named Ur-Nammu. He built the ziggurat in honor of the moon god. A later king, Nabonidus, rebuilt the ziggurat and made some changes. Archaeologists learned about these kings when J.E. Taylor began an excavation at the temple site in 1864. He found 4 cylinders, one at each corner of the ziggurat. The text on one of these cylinders was a record of the ziggurat's architects. I am Nabonidus, king of Babylon, patron of Esagila and Azida, devotee or follower of the great gods. Now that ziggurat had become old, and I undertook the construction of that ziggurat on the foundations which Ur-Nammu and his son Shilgi built, following the original plan with bitumen and baked brick. The Mesopotamians worshipped hundreds of gods. Each god had a name and a responsibility. See, there's another good note there. Mesopotamians worshipped hundreds of gods. The idea of what Nabonidus, him there being the king of Babylon, or the names of those aren't going to be too important for the test. If we ever get to the point where we are back in class and doing history, then that would make a difference. The Mesopotamians worshipped hundreds of gods. Each god had a name and a responsibility. People believed that several gods controlled parts of the universe, such as the sky, the sun, and the air. They were considered the main gods. Every city-state had its own god or goddess. Now, that would be a good note. In Ur, one god the people worshipped was the moon god, Nana. Nana, maybe, and maybe that's like your grandmother, I don't know. Your Nana. His statue was kept in the ziggurat shrine, and food was offered to him daily. Priests and priestesses who lived at the temple sacrificed animals and followed rituals. Keeping this devotion would keep the god happy. Now remember, animal sacrifice was instituted by God himself at Adam and Eve. He provided skins for them. And in fact, that's the kind of sacrifice that God said was acceptable to Cain, who didn't like the idea that he was rejected and his sacrifice was rejected. So the priests and priestesses who lived in the temple, we already read that part. So people relied on the priests to help gain the favor of the gods. The priests also interpreted the wishes of the gods. The people were taught that only priests could communicate directly with the gods, and this made the priests powerful in Mesopotamia. The priests and priestesses controlled much of the land. Now, you think about it, that was kind of an advantageous thing for them to do for themselves, the priests and the priestesses. Look at the top there let's finish this section until we get to king's government. It says the hundreds of gods required constant worship. Archaeologists think that the people may have placed statues of worshippers in temples. These statues would have stood in continuous prayer while their owners went about their daily lives. Placing the statues in the temple was a convenient way, for the people to provide constant worship. Now look at the top there. Now these, you don't need to memorize these particular gods, but if you look at them, some of them might sound familiar to you. Inanna, remember Nana, but Inanna was the morning and evening star goddess, the Sumerian name. The Akkadian name, Ishtar. The city that they were worshipped in was Uruk. The responsibility was they were the goddess of love and war. It kind of goes together there, right? Love and war, fighting and love. The sun god, which of course the sun was the most prominent feature of the sky during the day. Utu and Shamash, and then Larsa and Sipar. All right, both of those are and that was the god of the cities where Larsa and Sip are, and the god of truth and justice. Freshwater god Enki, Ea, and Eridu, the god of wisdom, magic, and arts and crafts, and then Ishkur, and then Adad, and there were several cities that followed them, god of thunder and rain. And you would imagine that was the kind of, they called him the storm god, the kind of god that you did not want to have angry with you. So kings and government, civilization needs a well-organized government to manage its resources. When the Mesopotamians began to live in cities, a large portion of the population stopped growing its own food. The people who continued to farm needed to grow enough food to trade with those who did not farm. A manager saw that the surplus food was made available to everyone, and so you see that they have a system set up where the cities could purchase food, or they would purchase foods to be able to sell to people. Sumer was made up of several city-states that often fought each other for more land and power. At first, the priest of a city-state tried to pick the best military leader to defend that city-state in battle. After the fighting was over, the leader was expected to return to normal life. But some of these leaders held on to their positions and became rulers. This was the beginning of kings. Eventually, every city-state had its own king. The king was considered a god's highest representative on earth. The Sumerians believed that a god selected the king, giving him authority. To stay in power, the king needed approval of the priest. A king respected the priest, and the priest acknowledged the king as the god's choice to rule the city-state. The temple was important not only as the center of religion, but also as the seat of the Sumerian government. The king took over some of the jobs previously done by the priest. He directed the building of new canals, temples, and roads. Each king served as the chief lawmaker and judge. Some kings wrote laws and ruled by them. In a lawbreaker often had to pay fines as a punishment. For example, a Sumerian code of law indicates that if a man cut off another man's foot or nose, he had to pay the injured man a certain amount of silver. Legal records were required for all business transactions, contracts, marriages, adoptions, and wills. Archaeologists have found many of Sumer's records still in their clay envelopes filed in the temples. And a pretty amazing thing if you think about it. One of the first civilizations, the civilization where Abraham was alive, you're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, probably about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. But to have these records is so clear. Now, if we had records today, 4,000 or 5,000 years from now, you can imagine the paper records won't last that long. They wouldn't exist. But with the clay records, they were able to last that long. All right, and so this is your assignment, and then you'll fill in the information on pages 34 and 35, and that should do it for you. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Have a great day. Bye.